One of the world's largest tech conferences, Collision, has now kicked off in Toronto, Canada. And this year, there is one area that's attracting more interest than anything else. Dan Williams explains.
The Collision conference is taking place in Toronto, Canada for a 5th time. The event brings together industry leaders, startups and investors to talk all things tech and discuss where the future is headed.
AI is dominating Collision.
Paddy Cosgrave is the CEO of Collision Conference. He says this year a key focus is on artificial intelligence, technologies that enable machines to perform tasks that mimic human-like intelligence.
We'll hear from the CEOs of some of the hottest young startups, but we'll also hear from voices like Professor Jeff Hinton, who is considered the godfather of AI, recently stepped down from Google. We're told because he wants to speak more freely about serious concerns he has about the direction of AI. So we're going to hear the good, and I think we're also going to hear the scary as well.
Another key area of focus will be cryptocurrencies. Digital currencies have seen huge fluctuations in its value in recent months amid increasing legal issues and government regulation.
I mean, one of the questions is going to be, is crypto passé? Is it finished? And I mean, there's a lot of good arguments that it was an overhyped bubble with a lot of froth and fraud. And there are others that say, no, there's still a bright future. We're just, on a journey towards that future.
The tech industry as a whole has faced significant headwinds in recent months. This year alone, it is estimated some 150,000 workers at US-based tech companies have been laid off amid mass job cuts. So this conference should bring some focus as to what is likely for the tech sector in the coming years ahead. Dan Williams, CGTN, Toronto.
Let's expand more on where AI is going and how the United States wants to regulate it. We're joined by Patrick Perkins. He's a professor at the Ohio State University School of Law in lovely Columbus, Ohio. Thanks for coming on our program to talk with us. We certainly appreciate it. Patrick, I want to talk about, I hope you had a chance to hear that story, because I thought a couple of interesting things. I want to get to AI in a second, but what about the organizers saying that perhaps crypto could be on its last legs? I'd like to get your thoughts on that. And how critical is it right now to hear all about AI, the good, bad, and the ugly?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to talk about them. I do think that the notion that crypto may be on its way out, the interesting thing about that is the crypto diehards will tell you all day, every day, that it's just getting started. And there's fascinating technology and billionaires to back up the innovations coming out in the crypto industries, trying to make it more accessible for day-to-day use. But I think that investors are really scaling back on crypto as an investment tool, which it was never really intended for in the future. So I think we may see crypto actually moving more towards its intended role moving forward, but it's going to be very difficult to see. It's difficult to predict that at this point.
And what about AI, the good, the bad, and the ugly? One thing you said, we're going to hear the good and the scary. Let's talk about the scary first.
Well, you have the scary on the large scale, which everybody thinks about, such as the Matrix, where it's global domination, apocalyptic scenarios. But even on the more of the micro, close to home level, we've seen so many problems with misinformation, development of fake content surrounding elections and things like that. AI technology only makes that easier and more accessible. It's also going to lead to further job layoffs as more and more jobs are becoming automated. Even sectors like the legal industry that people used to think were somewhat untouchable are now making many of my colleagues a little bit nervous about where AI could be putting lawyers out of the job.
Interesting. President Biden meeting with several tech executives last week. Let's talk about the Biden administration's biggest concerns about AI moving forward.
Yeah, the Biden administration's biggest concerns, in one way it can be summed up, is they really want to push back against the Silicon Valley narrative of break things fast, make things and break them fast. They really want people to be a lot more thoughtful about it and don't just put out half-baked products. How do you regulate that is the difficult aspects. They're also concerned about things like cybersecurity, privacy, and competition across globally. These are all areas, and it's really kind of difficult to boil it down into one or two talking points because the potential downsides are just everywhere, whereas the benefits are also everywhere as well. How do you strike that balance?
Yeah, and we also know, Patrick, that the gentleman considered the godfather of AI left Google, coming out and saying, we need to take a step back right now. How are AI developers trying to ease those fears?
In short, I don't think they really are overall, because there are multiple AI developers coming out and saying, please regulate us now before we do something stupid. How often do you have business owners saying, regulate us? How often do you have people, inventors, saying, please, there are going to be problems here? So yeah, there are some innovators out there who are saying, we're trying to put up safeguards, please trust us, we're going to do a good job. But more than I've ever seen out of any sort of innovative industry, there are so many industry insiders who are saying, don't let us do something dumb. Please put safeguards in place before we let this thing get out of hand. That more than anything else concerns me.
Well, Patrick, to me, one thing that I've talked to a number of people about, how do you regulate for various countries? There are some arguments that the U.S. is behind other nations on regulations. What is the U.S. Congress considering its points of contention so far? And how would you regulate something that's used here, used in China, used in Russia, used in Latin America, used on the continent of Africa?
And that global competition aspect is really one of the difficult aspects about regulating, because it's not only just regulating abroad, it's really akin to nuclear development back during the Cold War. It's not wanting to let the other global players get ahead of the US or ahead of China or ahead of whoever it might be when it comes to developing these tools, which really could be the hallmark of world dominance moving forward. There's some places like the EU are trying to rein it back faster rather than later. But even within, they're essentially just creating frameworks saying, hey, you need to do risk assessments of this. There isn't really a comprehensive way we know of to regulate it yet.
Kind of weigh both sides for me, if you will. Talk about the negative impact on humanity. Is it overblown? And all the positives that are out there. Are you optimistic about it moving forward?
So I'll start off with the positive, because I am extremely optimistic about it. Because if you think about it, from a really, really small level, there are so many problems that could help us with on a daily basis. If we want to say, hey, create this Excel document for me, it could just do that rather than me having to spend, half hour trying to figure out the correct Excel command. That's on a very small level. When you look at things like, hey, how can this help us develop the next great cure for a disease? I have one former client of mine in Silicon Valley who they are focused on trying to identifying winners of medications so that you don't put years of research into them to find out that it's a dud. AI can accelerate this process greatly in testing medications and developing cures for things such as not cures, but in creating solutions for climate change, such as helping us to figure out, the nuclear fusion that could really put us years, if not decades, ahead in research by just asking computers to do computations that we can't do nearly as fast. On the flip side of the downside, the downside to this, the thing I like to think about when I think about the downside, the very, scary scenarios. Already, we've had something similar to ChatGPT out there called Chaos GPT, where somebody decided to create a AI bot to try and destroy humanity. And it's a little bit humorous at this point, because in order to destroy humanity, it's essentially created a Twitter account to try and sway people about the downsides of humanity and why we need destruction. But it's also done things such as try to recruit other AI tools to research nuclear weapons and things along those lines. So it's easy to see that right now the technology is so young, but what happens 10 years from now when someone tries to do that?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And I'll leave the Twitter part and AI alone. We'll let that for greater minds than ours. Patrick Perkins, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for your insight.
All right. Thank you so much.